Welcome to today's weekday reflection, and today I'm reading from 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 23 following. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. By his wounds you have been healed. Don't get mad, get even was a saying popularised by President John F. Kennedy. And today that saying in many ways epitomises the philosophy of most people. Don't get mad, just get even. And we hear people gloating on talkback radio about how they got even with their ex-partner. Terrible tales of revenge being justified and even applauded on the radio because the supposed guilty person deserved it or had it coming. The reality is that everyone gets wounded at some time in life, that no one is immune from the hurts of life. However, what we choose to do with those wounds and hurts is what is important. We can get mad or angry, or we can get even, or we can choose to get both, or we might even choose a third way. We might choose to forgive. The reality is that most people choose not to forgive. Instead, they choose to hang on to their anger and their hurt and to let it fester. Why should I forgive them? They don't deserve it. And people tend to view forgiveness as something which is earned by those seeking to be forgiven. So if a person doesn't ask for forgiveness, then the majority of people appear to believe that they are justified in remaining angry and indeed getting even. And we see this desire to get even expressed through various forms of anger, suppressed anger, whereby people simply choose to be silent, simply to ignore the other person, to not speak to them, to turn their back on them, or to walk away whenever they see that person coming. It's one way of expressing anger, but it's also a way of getting even with that person by cutting them off, by ostracizing them, by gossiping about them behind their back. And it's one of the most popular methods of revenge or getting even through social media. Ghosting someone or posting anonymous, demeaning comments about that person online. And of course, then there's those who seek to express their anger or to get even through passive aggression, verbally harassing another person, making sarcastic comments to a person or about a person, finding fault with that person no matter what they do. Nothing that that person does or says is ever good enough. And of course, then there's the most extreme form of getting even. Lashing out verbally and physically in order to intimidate or physically harm another person. In the end, getting even getting mad, is all about inflicting physical and emotional pain on another person in the belief that by doing so, it will somehow ease the pain and the hurt that we feel within ourselves, while teaching the other person a lesson and showing them what it's like to be hurt. If I'm miserable, then I will make sure your life is miserable too. One of the problems with wanting to get even is that, like bitterness, envy and jealousy, it's addictive. And before you know it, it begins to take control of your life. It begins to shape your personality. And before you know it, you've become a different person. Your whole life, your whole purpose and existence is about getting even with someone, or perhaps even getting even with the world. And we've all met those type of people. People who are angry and bitter at life who find fault in every other person and every other situation. And the truth is, they're not particularly pleasant to be around. And we often see hints of this desire to get even, this bitterness within a person in their language. They begin to make generalizations such as all men are, or all women are the same. And most often, that stereotyping is simply a reflection of a wounded past or someone who is fearful about the future. Of course, the third way of responding to our hurts and our wounds and our fears is to forgive. And in Matthew 18, verse 21, Peter approached Jesus with the question, how many times should we forgive another person? And Peter then says, should we forgive 7 times? Now, the Jewish law stipulated that a person should forgive someone who offended them up to 3 times. So no doubt Peter thought that he was being particularly generous when he said, should I forgive 7 times? That he would be applauded by Jesus. But instead, Jesus responded, no, you should forgive someone 77 times. What Jesus was in fact saying is that there is no limit to forgiveness. There's no limit to God's grace. See, if you're keeping score of how many times you've forgiven someone, you haven't actually forgiven them, nor are you showing them grace. Paul, in writing to the Corinthian church, 1 Corinthians 13 verse 5, states, love keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't keep a record of how many times we forgive. See, God's grace is never exhausted, and neither should ours. During the Second World War, a German soldier dived into a shell hole, and there he found a wounded American soldier soaked in blood. And the German had compassion on him. And so he nursed the man's head in his arms and gave him a drink of water. And through that simple act of kindness, a bond was formed. And the dying man pointed to his pocket. And so the German soldier pulled the man's wallet out of his pocket. And from within the wallet, he pulled out a photograph of the man's family. And he put the photograph in the man's hand and enabled him to hold it up so that he could look at his loved ones for the last time. With bullets flying overhead, with war raging all around them, these two enemies, for a few moments, put aside their enmity, their hurts and their wounds, and showed grace. What happened in that shell hole? Did the war cease? No. Did evil cease? No. Were all the wrongs of the world righted? No. What happened was two enemies who under different circumstances would have been trying to kill or wound one another rose above their differences in order to see the other person simply as a human being. And that's what grace is. Being able to rise above our hurts and our wounds and to see another person as a human being. Forgiveness is rising above our hurts and wounds and looking beyond what we are or what we are feeling at any particular point in time and choosing to see an alternative way, to see other people not as enemies but as fellow human beings wounded and hurt by life who are in need of love and in need of grace and care. And so I come back to my original premise that everyone is wounded and hurt by life at some point in time. No one is immune from the hurts of life. However, we have a choice as to how we respond to those hurts and those wounds. And in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 24 we read, by his wounds we have been healed. It's an amazing statement by Peter, because our wounds cause us to wound other people. Our wounds cause us to hurt other people. Our wounds cause us to destroy other people. Our wounds cause us to want to get even, to get mad and to get even. But Jesus, by his wounds, did not use them as an excuse to get even, but as a means to bring forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing to the world. And so in verse 23 we read, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. By his wounds you have been healed. And so today, as we reflect upon the wounds that we have inflicted upon Jesus, the wounds of Jesus by which we have been healed, may we ponder as to whether we will allow the hurts and wounds others have inflicted upon us to be the justification for lashing out and wanting to get even, or whether we'll allow our hurts and wounds to be the means of grace whereby we bring forgiveness and reconciliation and healing to others who are wounded. Well, thank you for joining me today for this reflection. I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to having you join us again for another reflection on Friday.